On behalf of Northern Trust, we are delighted to welcome you to Exchange by Northern Trust, an interactive conversation around the art of collecting. A series of 5 panels on the contemporary art market, institutional and philanthropic engagement, the potential of new technologies, the ethics of collection, and supporting artists internationally. The following panel, Supporting Artists Internationally, a spotlight on Chicago and Paris, presented in partnership with Villa Albertine, a new program of the French Cultural Services in the United States, offering tailor-made residencies for creators, thinkers, and cultural professionals from around the world, and features Gallerists Jérôme Poggi and Mariane Ibrahim, and Palais de Tokyo President Guillaume Désanges, as they will discuss ways of supporting artists in an international career across gallery representation, institutional exposure, and international collecting, alongside artist Paul Maheke, current resident of Villa Albertine in Chicago, and moderated by Armelle Malvoisin, writer for Quotidien de l'Art and Beaux Arts magazine. In addition, panelists will discuss the particular role Chicago plays in their individual and collective practices as arts and cultural professionals around the world. Before I turn over the microphone to Armelle, I want to mention that today's program is being recorded for archival and possible future promotional purposes. Audience questions or interactions will not be included for future promotional materials. Please join me in welcoming our panelists.
Hi everybody, I'm Armelle Malvoisin. I'm a French journalist for the Quotidien de l'Art and Beaux Arts magazine. And this is my second time in Chicago. I love the city and the people. I'm a little bit surprised by the endless summer weather, but it's nice. I live in Lomé and Paris. My mother is French and my father is African, so I have both culture. So I can feel that the exchange between cultures is very important, as we gonna talk about Paris and Chicago, exchange and etc. Sorry for my French accent. I hope it's okay. But one told me for American people, French accent is so charming, so I'm pleased to please you. Before introducing my panel, I'd like to thank Axel Moller, where she... Axel. Axel Moller, the director of the Villa Albertine in Chicago, which is a new name since 2021 of the cultural offices of the French Embassy in the United States. Villa Albertine proposes an ambitious program of residencies supporting the presence of artists in Chicago in immersion for several months, 1, 2, 3, as Paul will explain his own residency. The ambition is to create a deep and lasting links between the two artistic scenes. And Axel Moller suggested and sponsored this talk, so thank you, Axel. While discussing with her, we remember that Paris and Chicago are sister cities since a long time. For instance, in 1909, while drawing maps for the future of Chicago, the architect and urban planner Daniel Burnham was strongly influenced by the vast renovation of Paris undertaken by Baron Haussmann in the second part of the 18th century. His plans were surnamed Paris in the Prairie. In the field of literature, one can mention Ernest Hemingway, the famous writer born and raised in Oak Park, and he associated with Paris, of course, in the 1920s. And one can mention the writer Nelson Algren, who lived in Chicago and fell in love with the French writer Simone de Beauvoir. So much passion between Paris and Chicago then. In the fair, you can see there is an installation by Julien Creuset in the In Situ Parcours. Julien Creuset is the artist who represents the French pavilion at the Venice Biennale in Europe next year. if you don't understand his work, it's normal, since the artist from the French gallery, Martinique, took up the right to opacity, a concept developed by the writer Edouard Glissant from Martinique as well. And Julien Creuset is now represented by Document Gallery in Chicago. You can see another work on the booth. But Guillaume Désanges will maybe tell more about the artist. So let me introduce briefly my French panel. Guillaume Désanges is the president of Palais de Tokyo, a very important art center in Paris. Mariane Ibrahim, the lady of the panel. You opened your first gallery in Seattle before moving very successfully to Chicago. It was about 12 years ago, something like that. 10, sorry. Mariane opened a second gallery in Paris 2 years ago. So she was first in Chicago before Paris. And then recently she opened this year a new space in Mexico. You will explain your everything. Jérôme Poggi, French gallerist based in Paris. You often came in United States for fairs, New York, Miami. This is your first time in Chicago? How is it possible? You will explain. Paul Maheke, French artist, your current resident of Villa Albertine in Chicago. So I will ask each of us. I'll start with Mariane, the lady, first. What particular role Chicago plays in your parcours of gallerist, and why Chicago first before Paris?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Armelle. Chicago has been a place that always sort of fascinated. You know, we all kind of compare. You know, we have like this kind of a comparison with New York, and Chicago is like the number two. And that number two is something that was very sensitive for me, because in my family I'm the number two, and number two is not always the last one. It could be the smartest one. So I found the city being a very smart city in terms of how they, you know, interact with different social groups, how they also have an amazing platform and support, let's say, for the artists. Museums, schools, and I was a little bit isolated in Seattle there, because I was there for family reasons. And I visited Chicago. It was, I think, around 2014 or 15, I can't remember. But at that time, there was an exhibition that was displayed at the Arts Institute of Chicago, with the work and the projects by David Ajayi. And this is where I came across a lot of artists, a lot of curators. And it was a very magical moment, because I was meeting not only, I was being acquainted to the space, to the city, but also the people that were creating such a momentum for Chicago, with artists like Kerry James Marshall, Theaster Gates. I was like basically in the same room as these guys. And it felt like I was, you know, Alice in Wonderland. It was, this is incredible. This is what I want to be part of. I want to be part of this movement and this group with, you know, thinkers and artists, and in a city that has such a long history. And so it was not very difficult to convince anyone that I was moving to Chicago. I just had to convince myself, because it was like a me, myself, and I gallery at the time. And so it was an absolute sort of irrational decision, because I say irrational in the sense like I've never lived, I haven't tested, I just close the gallery and say, okay, we're packing, we're going to Chicago, without even knowing that I will have a space there. you know, everything just sort of came together. But the act of living was, to me, the most important thing.
Without experiencing expo fair?
I've done one expo, which was the most unsuccessful fair, first time. And it's because I had, it was not the right presentation. And I think, and you will probably agree, Chicago has a very strong critique. You don't show up in Chicago and say, I'm going to show this and I'm going to sell it. It's like, they know when you're not, you know, doing things, you know, right. So they have like a very strong critique. They're used to great art. They're used to, you know, all of that. So I really was not thinking when I was doing my presentation. I came the second year. That was right. So I did a great booth.
You learned from...
Oh, yeah. But I always do that, so.
Okay. When you open your second gallery in Paris, you came with your Chicago habits, or how did you manage your new business in Paris compared to Chicago?
I think I came not with a little bit of Chicago attitude, but mostly with an American way of presenting work. I mean, I left France about 12 or 13 years ago, and I owe it to the sort of the American way of doing things, and I'm more American in France and more French in America. So business-wise, it's better to be American. And in terms of creativity and thinking, it's good to be French.
Okay. You told me that when it works in Chicago, it will work in Paris. What does it mean?
Well, it's as I say, we have an amazing artists and amazing institutions. So it's almost you almost feel like you have to get the approval and the validation from the Chicagoan collectors or institutions before heading somewhere. So when an exhibition received a great when we received a good reception, I feel confident.
Okay.
Because if the French don't get it, it's fine. The American will get it.
Could you comment a few images?
Yeah, I don't know where is mine. How does this work? Okay, this is not my...
Go on.
Okay. Sorry. Why don't you explain?
No.
Okay.
Go on, Mariane, please.
All right.
Welcome.
Okay.
Your artists are the same in Paris and Chicago?
Yeah. We have
where they come from? They're American, they're French, they're both, they're internationally artists?
Well, we have a very we have a program that is representing Afro descent artists. I'm mostly interested in the idea of, Afro artists, whether they're African American, African Caribbean, anything that starts with Afro, I'm in. So the idea is to basically connect all of these different narratives across, the Americas, Europe, Africa, the Caribbean, and see what is the common point. It's like imagining you're putting a feet in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and then with the other feet you're just making a circle and see what are the connections. So I'm just going to go through quickly with these images, but yes. The idea for this panel about supporting artists, of course we support artists locally, internationally, but what we do, we use, because in the context of the art fair, we also use the context, we use the art fair to sort of create projects and presentations that would highlight the work, that will stage the work in a way that will bring the attention. Because I've been doing a lot of those art fairs, and often I was one of the only, Black gallerists, and I would be showing, black artists at the time where really nobody really care, and they would even look at the booth and just keep walking. But you kind of want to say, okay, stop, look at me. This is what we have to do. So the presentation is very important to me. This is Amwako Boafo in Miami. Before it was Ayanna Jackson. Do I go back? Ayanna Jackson at Paris Photo. It was her first time, and before that, it was Florine Demosthène at the Armory show. And so. Yes, people say, why are you doing this? Why are you putting all of this color? Because already it's so expensive, so you keep adding, and for me it's like it's very important that we create this kind of a context, and as we go through, I kind of look back and I say, oh, this is what we did. Oh, we have the green booth there, and also navigating in those art spaces. It's very wide in every possible way. The walls are white, and that's how I came into the art fair. So we just decided to add a little bit of colors. This is at Art Basel, our first time in Switzerland. This is the Armory show. Was it last year?
Marianne, last question before I give the parole to Guillaume Désanges. When you are going to all these fairs all over the world, that your gallery comes from Chicago means something for the visitor or for the collectors? Or
No, actually before it was a little bit more fun because they would look at my program and they say, Seattle. There are black people in Seattle. They were like, but now with Chicago, it adds a little bit of prestige. Now we add Paris. It's like, amazing. And we haven't had a chance to add Mexico City because we are taking a bit of a step. We're not doing the art fairs this year, so I don't know how people will react now with Mexico.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Guillaume, you with Marianne, the person who's the most connected with Chicago. Could you tell your story with the city?
Yeah, my story with the city began 10 years ago. I was invited by Expo Chicago and the French embassy here in Chicago to. I think now there is a lot of curators, exchange of curators, but that year there were only 2. So we did an exchanging curatorial program, and what happened was it's the first time it happened in my life actually, because I used to travel a lot, and then I'm used to go and some days in a place, and it's the first time that 10 years after I still have a lot of contacts here, because when I was here I visited a project here and I met some people, and just after that some days here at Expo Chicago I was asked by Tony and Fabrice Rosier, who was working at the embassy, just to write a project, an ideal project that I could do here. And I immediately thought about not making an exhibition of French artists or something like that, but more a kind of residency program or something which I thought would be more based on a necessity, an ecological thing, meaning what would be interesting to do, not just to put a rootless project here, but more like thinking about working about this context, because I really realized even in a few days that the context was very exciting, especially from a French point of view, because there was a lot of social, artistic, intellectual, political, racial issues that were very interesting. I could feel it even more than in New York, for example. Of course, there are a lot in New York, but here you could really feel very easily, even in a few days. And then I just thought that it would be a good idea to do that, but I just thought not for myself. I thought you should do that, and then I was asked to write a project, which I did in the plane. I did a project in 2 pages in half an hour in the plane, and I say, okay, I will do my homework, and I will send it, and I was 100% sure that it would never happen. And then I did this project of organizing a residency program in Dorchester on the South Side in the frame of Siesta Gates project, and to invite intellectuals, writers, artists to get to be there on a very specific level on an unmeasured residency program, which would be very connected to the context, and we'll be prepared for that. And then I send it, and that's it. And then 2 months after, I received a phone call, and there was a CEO of Theater Gates in Paris, and he wanted to meet me. We met in a bar, and he was showing me photos, and he said, "Okay, this is a place where we could begin, and then here we can arrange furniture, and we have the budget and so on." I said, "But is it a joke or what?" 2 months after, so more my project was there, and then I said, "But when do you want to do it?" He said, "Not now, but maybe in 3 months." So I was totally shocked. Who do you think can be ready to go there for 3 months, in 3 months? And he said me, "You, maybe." So I was the first resident of my own project. So I was there, and it's and you know.
Is it method room?
It was called the method room. So we did it in a kind of emergency, and which and now 10 years after, so it lasted till 2020. After during the pandemic, and I tell this story because it says a lot about Chicago actually. So the question of durability, the question of it's more than just small contacts. It's really like something when you can put a seed and it grows, and that's exactly what I find interesting today, even at Palais de Tokyo, working in necessity and durability, and not doing things like ruthless thing, but doing things that really play a role in time. So that was very, very interesting during the years.
Yes. Could you tell about some residents of the...
Yeah, so actually the project...
This is Julien Creuset.
Yeah, what is... Okay, comment on va en arrière? How do you... yeah, okay, thank you. So the first resident was an architect called Xavier Vrenat. He was invited in the frame of the Architecture Biennale. And then he did a project of... the idea of this place was that the artist was not only invited to work or to observe, but really to make a project. So he was running the space. So all was prepared a lot in advance, and I could really like curate a project in advance. And when they arrived, the artists or the people who already had something to show and something to interact with. So the Xavier Vrenat did a project of an exhibition in the south side around the idea of the economical the School of Economics of Chicago and in a world order. So he curated this show when he arrived. I mean, in 1 or 2 weeks, and after he did a TV program based on the people of the south side, which was broadcasted every week on a website. So it was a very important project even for him, and it changed a lot his career. Actually, he was really coming from a kind of Marxist. Very like neo-Marxist vision, and here he learned a lot about minorities issues, which were very interesting for French intellectual. The second people I invited is a duo of curators called Le Peuple qui Mente. People is Missing, Kantuta and Alyosha, Kantuta Kiros and Alyosha Imhoff, who did a project. Also, they did an exhibition about the history, the question of time history. And they also here shot the first set of a film that they were doing, and they shot in the south side. Julien Creuset was the third one. He was invited in the bank at the same time had opened the art bank, so he was a resident there, and he did a project there, an exhibition project, and he met also I think the gallery document at the same time, and the next. Invited was a writer and journalist, Peggy Pierrot, who did a lot of projects. It was not anymore only set in the south side, but more in the Hyde Park Art Center, the Experimental Station, the Dussab Museum. She did a research project based on writing and also radio programs. And the last one, there is no pictures, is Nel Beloufa, who came, but it was a pandemic, so he did a more remote project here.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Jérôme, I'd like to speak with Paul first. Because Paul, you're resident at the Villa Albertine, but I discovered you were first once in Chicago before, and that's the point. That's why you are resident here, because you discovered Chicago first, and it was like a discovery for you. Could you explain? And
Yes, sure. So I was invited in 2021 to present a performance at the Renaissance Society, an art center in the actually area of Hyde Park. And there was kind of like a few things that happened that night that were like interesting and led me to actually apply for the residency at Villa Albertine. One was like to meet with Axel, who came to see the performance, who I didn't know, and told me about the Villa Albertine. And literally an hour after that, I found myself on a roller rink in the south side, where I was invited to join by a friend of mine who's part of like the roller skating community there. And similarly to Guillaume, the next day I was taking my flight and I was like, I need to come back to Chicago and to immerse myself in this community because there were so many ties with my life. Because as a kid, I was a figure skater, and figure skating was very kind of like my point of entry into performing. And I realized while on the rink that there were so many things that I'm doing in my performance now that are kind of tied to that, and one of them being the idea of a surrounding audience, for example. So that's something that was kind of like interesting. And I wrote the project and then got in, and so I just arrived a month ago, and I am kind of looking at where movement in general in my practice, where movement, sound, and identity dialogue, basically. And for me, the roller rink culture that is very specific to Chicago was particularly interesting because it is for me like a fundamentally black space in many, many ways. And this is something that is, again, like of personal interest, but also kind of like reaches far out of my own body and my own practice. And that's something that I need as well. So I'm here like more as a kind of like a receptor. So I'm taking in a lot of information, and that's what I've been doing for most of the months here.
Okay, during the residency, are you supposed to produce or create something, or is this only research about future projects?
So it's research based, and at first I had the idea of coming here to prepare for a film that was kind of like looking at the roller rink culture as well as the life of a figure skater called Souria Bonali, a French figure skater that was very famous in the 90s because she was one of the only black women on competing at such a high level. And so but then I kind of like scrapped everything when I arrived because I felt like that I didn't want to extract anything, because it's quite easy when you are on a residency coming into a context that you don't know to kind of like be fascinated by things that could turn quickly into exoticism, and I didn't want to do that. So I wanted to kind of like more think about the rink and skating as a practice of resilience, as something that is also generative of like joy and celebrating like blackness in a way. And now I'm finding myself like kind of writing something that would be properly like used in a performance maybe next year, that is kind of also connecting the figure of the skater with the figure of the vampire or the undead. So that's like kind of what it's becoming, but it's like in a moment where I'm just like putting so many threads.
Okay, could you comment some images you?
Yeah, I don't know. I literally, when I was asked images, I didn't know exactly what to put because I don't have. Yeah, it was just like, okay, let's put some example of my work. These are like, it's more just like as a background, like just to give you an idea of what I'm doing. I guess this is an installation currently exhibited in Prague. My work is often kind of like mixing different medias, drawing, writing, video. This is a performance that happened on the High Line last year in New York. And this was actually the image of me jumping. It was at the Renaissance Society. So that's the moment when I discovered Chicago and then I decided to come
And
back.
you fall in love
Yeah.
with Chicago.
And there was also a little nod to Jérôme because the yellow that we see is actually part of a work from Kapwani Kiwanga that Jérôme represents. Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. Now, Jérôme, this is your first time in Chicago. You have a booth in the fair with two artists, Kapwani Kiwanga and Babi Badalov. We all know that you have a revelation in the plane and you rewrite a project to come back to Chicago.
But that's almost the way it worked. Actually, it's true that
So tell us about your experience in Chicago and the
Chicago.
fair with the artists, with the people, with the collectors, with the visitors, with your...
there is always a
Everything.
moment for everything. So it's true that Chicago is a city. I don't know why. This is the first time I'm coming to Chicago. I used to live when I was young in Atlanta, in Georgia, for a year, and so at that time I was working at the French consulate, and I was the artistic attaché. So I traveled quite a lot, especially in the southeast of the states, in the Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, and for some reason I never went to Chicago. And so sometimes it's destiny, and this time destiny had the face of Tony, actually, right here, because we were in Miami Art Basel last December, and we met a Chicago-based collector, Karen, and we're showing an artist from Ukraine, so nothing to see with Chicago. And then she brought Tony, and you invited us to think about, coming to Chicago. And I was with my director, Camille. And once again, in the plane back to Paris, we're thinking, wow, I don't know, I felt it was the right moment for me to come to Chicago because we already had, some contacts here, such as, Benedicta Badia, for instance, who is a very inspiring collector for us, or Jeannie Gang also, with someone we are very close to, who was there. So I think maybe if I would have come before in Chicago, it wouldn't have been the right moment, and maybe not all these beautiful things that happened this time would happen at that time. So, and so since we arrived, so we decided, well, no, I must say something before, is that Tony was, nice enough and clever enough to say, well, think of what you could bring to Chicago, and if you want, well, we're going to treat you in Chicago. Come to Chicago for a couple of days, and we're going to host you. And then maybe that would allow you to meet with some people here in Chicago and think about, what would be the best proposal for you to bring in Chicago. And it is true when you want to introduce yourself to someone, the first thing to do is just to be interested in the person, you will introduce yourself to. And so Camille met many people, like collectors, like that we already knew, like Eugene Fu, for instance, and some curators also, and the French embassy also advised us so many people to meet here in Chicago. And so when she came back, we did a kind of brainstorming, and we thought that the best would be to bring Kapwani Kiwanga in dialogue with Babi Badalov. So that's what I do most of the time, as the topic of that meeting is how can you promote internationally some artists. What we usually do is that we dedicate solo shows in our, or at least duo shows, so always curated project like Mariane does, so that, you have so much proposal in the context of affairs, so you need to have something that is not only eye-catching, if not, it would be something like advertisement. So, but you must be something that retain the attention of someone and also allows you to be able to speak deeply about the practice of an artist who you are introducing, in a new context. So, because you have two kinds of galleries that are proposing for sale some artists that are already well known. So then it's quite easy. I mean, you can, hang a work of each artist you would like to sell, and that's it. But when you are really a gallery of promotion, I mean, you need to have all the works necessary for you to be able to articulate a speech about the artist. So that's why, I mean, 2 artists are the maximum that I usually show in a fair. So here you can have some more example. This is a show that we did at the Armelle show. It was dialogue between 2 Canadian artists, so Kapwani Kiwanga and Larissa Fassler. That was Kapwani Kiwanga. It was a solo show that we did a few years ago in Miami Art Basel. So not only a solo show, but really a project that was produced for Miami with the Asian references. So it made sense to show it in Miami. That was at the Armory show also. The first, I think that was one of the very first shows of Kapwani in a fair context. So 2014 or 15 maybe. The first time it was in 16. Oh, we were neighbors. This is when we met, actually.
Thank you,
So
Mariane.
16, you have a better memory. So the first time she used sisal to make works of art. So this is another, I mean, that was one of my favorite fair. It was at FIAC in Paris, because that was the only time, the first time and only one, when I had a window on my booth. So that was really extraordinary. So that was at Le Grand Palais, and you cannot see, you know, what you could see through the window, but it was the Pont Alexandre III, so Alexander III bridge in Paris, one of the most beautiful bridge in Paris. So I could see the Seine River, and that was a very specific project of Capuani made of fresh flowers that was supposed to fade during the length of the fair. So that was really beautiful, one of the most beautiful booth, and but most risky also. When you only have flowers to sell, it's not very easy to imagine that it would be possible. And no, the other way. C'est par là? Non. Comme ça marche dans l'autre sens? C'est là? Ça?
Le petit rouge.
Ah, le grand, ok. And well, this is and Babi Badalov that we brought. So these are also some solo shows of this artist from Azerbaijan, who is from a different generation than Kaponi Kiwanga. He's someone who is he's been living in France as a political refugee for many years. So he recently, well, I mean 5 years ago, had the French citizenship, nationality. Guillaume knows him very well because you showed Babi Badalov in Brussels at La Verrière. And even before, yeah, I mean, you are one of the very first person who met Babi when Babi arrived in Paris. He's someone who is very moving. I mean, his life is something that must be counted, because he was born in Azerbaijan at the frontier of Iran. And at that time, Azerbaijan was part of the USSR, so he was enrolled in the Red Army to do his military service. He went to Moscow, where he discovered discrimination and physical violence, because he was coming from another country. He had dark skin, and he was an artist, he was gay, he was Muslim. So when he arrived in Moscow, he was really destroyed physically. He lost all his teeth at that time. And that was the very beginning of a nomadic life that he had all his life long, but against his will. He went to St. Petersburg, was part of a very active underground scene that was invited to show in California. So he went there, and he decided to stay in the US, but as a clandestine for 3 years. He was expelled, went to the United Kingdom, was expelled 5 times, went to refugee camps in the United Kingdom, even prison, and then crossed Europe by foot to go back to his own country, where he was rejected because he went to the US. So he went west, and so his family rejected him. So he came back to Moscow and then came back to Europe. Well, that's a very long story. I mean, it could be a movie actually about Babi Badalov, and his whole work, is about that kind of nomadic life, and it's a reflection of the complexity of our global world. He's using words, he's painting words and drawing words, playing with words. In his head, everything is melting, sounds, languages, and etymology, meanings. When he says discrimination, he hears scream and nation, discrimination. So you're going to play with words, graphically speaking, using a kind of ornamental writing. So that's what we brought here in Chicago, and that has, I must say, a lot of success. I think everybody feels very much concerned about the work of Babi Badalov and his life, actually.
Yeah, the works you present on your booth by Babi Badalov is very singular and unique. You can see it doesn't look like anything else in the fair. How the visitors?
How do they react?
Yes.
Well, it depends on the profile of the visitors, but as I said, I think everybody feels very much concerned about that nomadic life, and so people are very, very moved, actually, I must say, when we show the work of Babi. And then after we decided to bring a very institutional presentation of the booth. So we have a lot of museums coming to see the show. And I must say that we have a very strong critical reception about the show and the dialogue between Babi and Kaponi Kiwanga, because we are speaking about Babi, but Kaponi Kiwanga in another way with some other shapes. She's also speaking about visibility and discrimination and main history and minor history. So it makes, a context, that allows to have very interesting discussions with everybody.
Okay, thank you. I heard about Chicago. Chicago is much more collaborative than competitive. Who can command that?
I think I said that over the phone the other day.
You and Mariane,
Yeah,
I think. But go on.
No, that I think that may be a common thing that is said here, but it's really something I really noticed by myself, that the people in Chicago just stay long in Chicago, and there is a real, scene. But of course, every city has a scene, but here the scene is very connected, very supportive. That's true that people, when I arrived the first time, and then in my first stay here, there was always someone recommending me to someone else, and there is this very family thing. There also, I would say, collaboration is very important. And I heard once, I don't know who told me that, at the School of the Arts Institute, one of the teachers told the students, you should get along well because you'll be together in 10 years. So you'll still be together in 10 years. So there is this idea of durability here, which nowadays I think is a real chance and a real quality, because of also the question of like local network, which is important. What learned in the last year, I think, the global market or the global art scene is that it's so important to have vernacular forms. When you come to Chicago, that's one of the questions we discussed with Tony Carman the first time I came here, when he referred to me, what do you think we should do here? And I said, you shouldn't try to seek or to run after the international standards, but just look around what is around and make it. This is the most interesting when you come to Chicago, I think. It's to really understand what is around and how it can connect with internationally, of course. But that's something very important. And that question of collaboration, it's still the case for me. I think it's Tony who introduced me to Mariane in Paris remotely. So there is this kind of real like family or Chicago, I would say, collaboration, which is very important. And that's true that, for example, here now at Palais de Tokyo, I work with Naomi Beckwith, who was curator at the MCA here, which is now at Guggenheim. And then all that makes Brima Abdul Malak, that I met here. She was in New York, but I met her in Chicago. Now is the Minister of Culture in France. So it's funny how there is still a lot of this network existing from what happened here. I think it says something about a spirit of collaboration.
Do you have a next project linked to Chicago?
Actually,
Tokyo? No?
maybe I should think about that. But I always I think the project of the Method Room, was replaced successfully by Villa Albertine. So I think this project maybe a little inspired also the how we can do on-measure project. I think the Villa Albertine project is very close to what I try to bring here, with this idea of something which is very rooted and also in a question of interactive, which is important. Also what you said about not bringing or extracting something, about what you can bring to here. That is very important. It is very ambitious and very, can I say, pretentious, but positively pretentious, that all the artists and writers I invited here, I really thought they could also bring something to that thing. And this is important, I think.
Paul?
What can you bring to your...
I feel like, I don't know, I think like, I'm quite like a sensitive person when it comes to space and energies and stuff like that. So I've been more of a receptor, I feel, at the moment. I feel like I've been soaking into the Chicago kind of like fabric and trying to understand. actually, it's been rather humbling, actually, trying to navigate the city. I've been forced to also think about navigation in ways that are like both pragmatical, because I don't drive, so I have to take like public transport, and with all its difficulties, but also like more on a metaphorical level, like thinking about me being mixed race, thinking about the geography of the city, like about bodies and how they move through space. So for now, I've not find myself in a position of like teaching or bringing something to the city, I guess. Like, let's see in the next phase of the project, maybe, yeah, there will be definitely like a give back.
Okay, Mariane, what about your collaborative experience in Chicago?
Well, first of all, the Midwestern hospitality and warmth and welcome is real. Yeah, I was very surprised when we announced that we were moving to Chicago. The gallery was going to move to Chicago without knowing where we were going to be. We received an amazing welcome from our peers, so from galleries. They were very happy that we moved to Chicago. In fact, as soon as we came here, we received so many invitations. We were greeted by all of the galleries, curators, artists, it felt very surreal, because that level of not much collaborative support is not that much present, wasn't present in Seattle. So yeah, you will notice that whenever we are doing, let's say whenever we're doing a vernissage at the gallery, you probably will see half of the gallerists, at our space.
It's rare.
Yeah, they will be there. We hang out, we very supportive of one another, and we just we don't cut the collectors into pieces. We're not fighting. We invite everybody. We were co-hosting dinners with Monique Meloche right before the COVID, and often when our agenda is not aligned, we let the other gallery, okay, I'm having an opening like next week, please stay open late, so we can, have people come on both spaces. So this is, of course, something that you were not expecting to have in Paris when we moved, and it's a kind of a very specific to Chicago. I don't feel that in any other places, even when we go on art fairs. It's basically open source.
Okay,
you can do whatever.
So following my first question, what could Paris learn from Chicago, and how?
That. Just to be a little more enthusiastic and welcomed and positive, and how?
How change mentalities?
Well, I think they have other issues to deal with now, but I'm sure. I'm sure the next generations and on, we're bringing a very different program to Paris, and reconnecting with the people of of African descent. So there is a lot of work we're doing, and I think it's positive that we are also interacting with that group, because you will agree, especially Jérôme and Guillaume, that the level of diversity and inclusion is very, very small in Paris, despite its colonial past and its history. So I think there has to be an awakening from the institutions before we will have, and I think that enthusiasm will be brought by the people who are not visible in those spaces.
Yeah, thank you. Before asking the public some question, do you have some question to ask to each other? No?
Who designed your shirt, Jérôme?
Try to guess.
Good question.
No, the question is that what is written. So stand up.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you can read. So it's Babi Badalov who did that. So democracy.
Ah, wow.
Democracy. Yeah.
Wow. Now, do you sell some shirts like that in your booth?
Actually, some T-shirt. He's doing a lot of T-shirts most of the time. Sometimes pants also. And that it was a biennale in Brittany, the Biennale de Rennes, that was curated by François Piron. You had a shop, indeed, where you could purchase the T-shirt of Babi, as well as recently at the French Institute of History of Art. He did some T-shirts like that that could be purchased. But I promised the collectors, you know, here who are purchasing the works of Babi at the fair that I would offer my shirts. Because I have several of them, so I feel like a soccer player, you know, at the end of a match.
No.
So
Wait,
tomorrow night at 7, I invite you to be at the exit of the fair, and I'll get, you know, yeah.
I think because you're a man, you can say that.
No, you would have even more success, you know. Camille will do it. Camille, my director, she also has a
She
shirt.
will do it
here.
too.
She will do it too. So tomorrow at 7.
Okay. Thank you. We stop there. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, of us.